Okay, in this class, we're going to continue our discussion of the substantive requirements for patentability with a discussion of the utility requirement. So in order to claim a patent over an invention or discovery, you have to show that there's some kind of use that a FOSITA would be able to see or understand for a invention or discovery before you can claim patent protection over it. In other words, you can't just claim something and then look for a use for it later. You've got to have some idea or some projection about what you're going to do with a particular invention or discovery before you can claim patent protection. And the sort of classic example of how that works is the Supreme Court case, Brenner v. Manson. So essentially there, the patent claimants wanted a patent over a particular chemical compound. They suspected that that compound may have therapeutic uses, right? They were investigating different ways of curing diseases, and they figured, well, this compound is similar to other compounds that have turned out to be useful. We haven't been able to test it yet. We don't know for sure if it's going to do anything or do what we want it to do, but we have a pretty good hunch that it might be useful and it might be something that we could utilize in future therapeutic techniques. So we want to patent it now so we're safe. We have exclusive control over it going forward. And the court said, no, you can't do that, right? Before you can claim patent protection, you have to actually have a use that you're planning to put the compound to, right? That you have to say what it's going to do. You have to say what you've identified as the specific use for the compound, not just the compound itself. And it has to be a use actually tied to what you know about or what a reasonable FOSITA would know about the compound and its properties or the invention or discovery and what you might potentially do with it. And the PTO has actually adopted a set of guidelines for applying the utility requirement. Essentially, it says, look at the invention or discovery, see if there's anything you can characterize as a utility, making sure that it isn't a utility that's simply, put in a landfill or fill up a test tube with it or something along those lines that doesn't depend on the nature of the invention or discovery. If it satisfies that requirement, if there's anything that you could do with it that would serve any social function whatsoever, then it's sufficiently useful to be the subject of patent protection. So big picture point here is utility requirement exists and is imposed on every patent and does structure at some level the kinds of things and points in time at which really you can claim patent protection, but it's not a very strenuous burden on the patent applicant, right? Because anything pretty much can qualify as a use sufficient for the utility requirement, so long as it plausibly could be something you would do with the invention or discovery. And you can always, of course, subsequently come up with additional uses for whatever it is that you've claimed. So ultimately, the question is, can you show that there's something you can tie to what you're claiming that would make it a thing that would be useful and therefore qualify, and therefore you can look for other uses in the future. Okay. So another case engaging with this question is Juicy Whip v. Orange Bang, which concerned essentially a juice dispenser. You may have seen these at your local convenience store. You go to 7-Eleven, Circle K, a store like that, Speedway, whatever. You might see a drink dispenser with a liquid sloshing around in the top of the drink dispenser. Well, historically or traditionally, the liquid in the drinks dispenser was the liquid that was dispensed into your cup when you went and served a drink. In other words, what you were looking at in the container was what ultimately what you would be given to drink. And Juicy Whip licensed an invention that kind of played with that assumption, right? So essentially what it did was take a machine that had a container on top full of sloshing liquid, but actually dispense a drink from a set of equipment below the counter, right? So what you were seeing was not what you were getting. What you were actually getting was a combination of ice, drink mix, and carbonated beverage that was being dispensed from a entirely separate system underneath the counter. And what happened was that Orange Bang introduced, so Juicy Whip was, selling and marketing its own devices for delivering this method of delivering a beverage, right? With the juice on top, the appearing to be juice on top, the actual juice beverage being dispensed from beneath. And Orange Bang introduced its own similar machine, which also introduced juice from below rather than from the container. And the argument from Orange Bend as to why their device was not infringing was that the Juicy Whip patent was invalid. Well, why was that? They said, look, there's a utility requirement, and the utility requirement requires that the use of the invention or discovery be a legitimate use, right? It can't be a fraudulent or deceptive use that's an effort to steal from consumers. So you can't patent the method of stealing people or cheating at cards or whatever. This invention is essentially a way of cheating consumers, right? You're making them believe that they're getting one thing and actually giving them something else. They think they're getting juice from the dispenser. They're actually getting juice from the system beneath. That's misleading. The only purpose of the invention is to mislead consumers, and therefore it's not the kind of invention or discovery that satisfies the utility requirement, because the use or the utility is essentially or literally fraud, right? You're telling consumers you're giving them one thing. The purpose of the invention is to make consumers believe they're getting one thing while they're actually getting something else. And the Federal Circuit rejects that argument and says, no, this invention does satisfy the utility requirement. Whatever consumers think about the source of what it is that they're consuming, this is in fact a useful invention. First off, it enables a more sanitary way of dispensing the material, right? You don't have to have it exposed. You can have it sanitarily contained in hermetically sealed containers and then dispensed directly to the consumer rather than opening it to bacteria. It's also a lot easier and cheaper and faster to clean up for the owner of the machine, right? They don't have to take the machine apart and wash it and refill it and so on and so forth. It's just, take off one set of dispensing receptacles and plug in a new set and let that same presumably non-potable, probably non-organic liquid up top there keep on sloshing around looking like something delightfully orange or purple or whatever to drink. So it is useful because even though it makes consumers think that they're getting one thing when they're actually getting something else, it also makes consumers better off, right? They shouldn't want what's in the container. They should want what they're actually getting. And in fact, they're getting what they expect. They're just getting it from a different place. And that's fine.